you. I have to tell you guys, I had all these plans. I worked for days and days and nights to come up with just the right notes and edit them down so I'm saying just the right thing in just the right amount of time, and I'm chucking all of it. Following Peter's, brilliant essay there. Bill Parsons just came up and asked me how I thought about that, how that landed with me. And it was interesting because it was actually a question that I was asking myself as I was listening to him. It was so deeply rich and erudite and brilliantly academic and intellectual and insightful, and just, it scratched a lot of deep itches inside of me. It's like, yes, this is what, a lot of the experiencer and abductee community has been waiting on for decades. So in that sense, I don't know where Peter is right now, but I just want to say, personally, very much, thank you for this. And I know that that is representative of the kind of work that scientists and academics are increasingly getting courageous, to venture into as this phenomenon, for lack of a better word to say it, continues to march forward. I do want to share a couple of thoughts, in reply and as a way of introducing everyone. So I am going to take a few minutes here. But before I do that, I'm going to do something that I hope lands well. I'm going to try it. I don't know how many people have watched the Academy Awards or big, any kind of award show, but I usually find that when they try to say thank you, when somebody comes up to accept an award, then they go down this whole list of all the people that got them there and, who helped. And I always went, yawn. Like, who cares? We don't know those people. Why does it matter? Why are they taking the time to do that? And now I know. Because for everyone who has been so generous in their warm expressions of appreciation for the work that I'm doing here, the immediate response that upwells in my heart is that there's no I. Obviously, that we are a village of people who are working on this. And I wanted to give you guys just some perspective of how far back the village goes. So if you'll just hang with me for just a few minutes here, I want to do a little exercise. So obviously this starts even before this, but specifically for the metadata research materials that we're working on, it starts in no small part and rather in large part with Whitley and Ann Strieber. Why don't you stand up for a second, Whitley, if you don't mind, just for a second. Whitley? Whitley's been at this a long time. And along with Whitley and Ann, it's actually thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of individuals who have had these encounters that wrote to you guys. So it's not just Whitley and Ann and your helpers, but it's all of those people who wrote to them and took the time back in the day handwriting these long narratives about what had happened to us. And after Whitley, or with Whitley and Ann and all of those people, there was John Mack. And there was John Mack at PEER, the Program for Extraordinary Experiences Research. It's for every single person who ever worked at that office, and there were many through the years. It's for all of the experiencers who wrote into John, as they did with Whitley and Ann. And there are thousands of them, and we have those archives, that are helping us with this metadata project here. It's the 300 plus experiencers that John worked with in session. And it's also Will Boucher in particular, who is the GEMI archivist. He is a walking library, like he's practically AI himself in terms of the knowledge that he's internalized. I don't know what we're going to do when he's not here anymore. There's the Mack family themselves. There's Danny Mack, the eldest son, who is really taking on the role of steward for all of this. He's in support of all of the work that we're doing. And beyond that, as we were pulling out all of these archives, John's archives in particular, out of 20 years worth of storage following his death, we had this massive digitization project that we undertook that I was supposed to be here, as some of you know, for just a month to finish up. That was in January of 2023. I have not been back home yet. My husband and I talk every day. Thank God he's a very kind and forgiving soul. I think he hopes I'm coming home, and I hope I'm coming home. But honestly, I don't know where all of this leads, you know? So, but in the digitization project, and we have some of these people here today, there was Mark Hewitt, there was Lisa Stemler, are you here? Yep, Lisa, can you stand up, please? There was Heather Hawley, who's not here. There was Mike C. and his friend, who is not here. There's Karen Young, where are you? Raise your hand at least, don't be shy. Then there's Brian Lee, where are you, Brian? Over there, hi, Brian. And other people who helped us with the digitization project when we got here. So there were a number of Rice students that helped out. There was Tyler Odell in particular, who just did some of the worst, like most tedious scanning of all. He spent hours and hours and hours at it. There was Amanda Nedham, who has been walking around sort of being a producer here today. Where is she? She's actually there you are. Yeah, don't be shy. She's actually our in-house fine arts specialist, and she's the one who's done all of the curating of the art. So whenever you see these pictures, and I think you're going to show some later, of the art that's come out of the letters, that's in no small part thanks to Amanda. She actually speaks brilliantly on the topic, like very inspirationally. I tried to drag her up here this time, and she was just too busy with too many things. So we'll get you for the art of the impossible, and you can give a proper presentation. So there's Amanda Nedham, and then there's Bonita Kreider. Where are you? So she's joined our team recently to help. Then there's also, of course, Amanda Foki, who I'll introduce in detail in a few moments. She, along with Jeff, represent two of the tripod legs, and I think I'm probably the third one. So between the three of us, we anchor this metadata research project together. And then we brought in a phenomenologist, because I had the bright idea that I only wanted to look at abductees. And like somehow there was a difference between abductees and experiencers, and it became very clear very quickly that that was a false, division to create. And the phenomenologist said, that's not how we do that. We leave it all on the table. So thanks to her and her guidance, we are now looking at all of the material that we have, everything that's in it. We're not making any judgments about what to keep or what not to keep. We're analyzing it just as it is. So we're going to scrape it for every bit of qualitative and quantitative data, again, in no small part to her support and instruction around that. So you'll get to hear from her later as well. There's also Charles Yokoyama. He was a senior science journal editor. He's a neuroscience background. He was one of the gatekeepers of human knowledge. So he was one of the people that, in my mind at least, and I think for many others, determined in some way what could be given any kind of merit, right? What gets in, what doesn't get in, what's real, what's not real. And it was important to me that we have a scientist in this project, because I think there was too many opportunities to make mistakes if we didn't have somebody who thought about this work differently than someone who comes from the humanities or from the experiencer side. So I've worked really hard to try to create a balanced team. And Darren King, are you here as well? Where did he go? Maybe he's somewhere else. Darren King helped us out for a while in his capacity as an engineer. He kind of helped us understand the space that we were moving into for the AI and the LLM and image recognition tools that we were going to need. And then it became very clear that we needed an engine that was much more robust and had a capacity larger than any of us in the team, that had a skill set different than what any of us had. And enter Elliot Hauser, who is just, I think of him like a 12-cylinder muscle car, but I think he's just that much of a worker. And all of us, I just want to say too, there's not a single person on this in this team that doesn't work nights, weekends, every last minute, spare minute that they have to give everything that they can to help make this happen. And I don't say that as a badge of honor. I think we all need to take a lot more time off and vacations than we do, but it shows just what the level of dedication is to get this work done. So with Elliot, he's coming in to help us from the information systems side. So he helps in a number of different ways. Most recently, while all of this is going on, he's getting out 2 grant proposals while he's also finishing his contribution to the presentation that we're going to do, and also helping us look into the future for how we can start to build a professional and academic community that's drawn to or attracted to, to the outcomes of the work that we do here. So, and along with that, I think we have a new person coming in, Gretchen Stallman, who I have yet to meet, but she's a new team member. Gretchen, are you here? In the back, yes. So she's going to come in to help partner with Elliot. And then also Michael Kelly, who's our beloved team member as well. He's a researcher extraordinaire. He can just grind for hours to pull out every last little detail. So, having said all of that, and there are more, there's more than that, but when you guys say, Karin, thank you so much for doing this, this is who you're really saying thank you to. So I wish you guys would just give them all a warm, big round of applause. So I'm going to do just a little comment, and then Amanda, I'll hand it off to you. As I was sitting listening to Peter, scratching numerous deep itches, I kept asking myself the question of, well, does this mean I'm finished? Am I done now? Because I think I heard Gary Nolan say this recently somewhere. I don't care that I have to do it. It doesn't have to be me that does it. It just needs to get done. And for so long, for decades now, our community has been waiting for science and academia to take this seriously. And it's really clear that that's happening now. So with that, I thought, okay, maybe I get to call my husband, I'm coming home, honey. And as I sat there and listened and felt into my heart, I heard, nope, not yet. And J. Christopher King, where are you? The tears are coming. He dared me. He's like, every time I see you, you're crying. And I thought, yeah. I thought for sure I was going to get through this one without even getting a little bit weepy. But there's something here that is incomplete if the experiencers aren't here representing ourselves, right? So Peter has this beautiful, beautiful mind, and all of these other academics here who come with these beautiful minds and beautiful heart. I have a mind, a sturdy mind, but my heart swells out of my chest, and I think that's where the tears come from, right? And in this case, we've been waiting, this community has been waiting for decades to have a space in which science and academia, the scientists and academics are taking the subject matter seriously so that we can come forward and tell you what we know. So we can say, this is what I experienced, here are the nuances of it, here are the implications for physics, here are the implications for consciousness, here are the implications for the corporeal nature of it, here are the implications for the out-of-bodiness of it, here are the implications for how it's all connected. We have something to say. And we also have something to say about what they said to us. The messages are clear every time, over and over again. Not 100% of the time. Sometimes these events are super scary and people don't get past. Sometimes I can't get past the worst moments of it. But as time goes on and we can be still and present with what has been communicated in shorts, repeatedly, it's always about humankind, how we're being to ourselves, what we're doing to the planet, and we're being given this challenge, this opportunity to notice what we're doing, and at this crossroads, at this critical moment in time, that if we don't take advantage of, if we don't stop and decide to do something differently than how we've done it before, then we're very likely to see some of the worst outcomes of the images that were shown to people by these beings. So the destruction of the planet, so earthquakes, barren planet, tidal waves, war. And we feel this, experiencers feel this in our hearts. And so this so much isn't about needing to say, please believe in us, believe that this happened. It's, we know this happened, and we really have something to contribute to the way that, that humankind moves forward in our evolutionary trajectory. So, so I'm just asking that you'll go on the ride with us. Scientists, academics, friends, colleagues, please continue to do what you're doing, because eventually it will allow me to get back home and get to my husband. In the meantime, I'm going to keep working. We're going to keep doing this work, and I want to introduce our colleagues who are each responsible for a piece of this. We want to help you understand how we're working behind the scenes to get all of this data out to everyone as soon as possible. And to that end, I would like to introduce Amanda Foki, who is one of the most emotionally intelligent individuals I've ever met in my life. She's incredibly capable and competent. She shares many resources with us. She's creating new systems within the Woodson Research Center. She's working overtime with a lot of her archivists to make this happen. The archivists are working overtime to make this happen. This is an enormous project, and she's stepping up to the plate and expanding to accommodate everything that we are bringing to her. So on that note, Amanda, will you please come up and share with us your thoughts? Thank you, everyone.
All right, hello everybody. I have some slides. I have Karen's slides.
Yeah, you have to just blow through them.
So you're just going to see Karen's slides very briefly. I'm going to keep
okay.
People might want to see them. Okay. All righty, so thank you for the very kind introduction. It's very hard to follow Karen Austin. And then talk about archives. So some of you will be excited about archives, and some of you may be hoping that I keep it short. But so I am going to keep it a little bit brief, but I think it's very helpful to have the baseline understanding of what we mean in a literal sense about what the archives are and what we're doing, so that then we can go on and talk about the research that can be done with them. So I am the head of the Special Collections Department in the library at Rice University. It's Fondren Library, and our department is called the Woodson Research Center. And we are the home of the Archives of the Impossible, which, as Jeff mentioned, are in the process of becoming the Center for the Impossible. So that's going to be unfolding over the next year. And as Karen was mentioning, we're in this metadata research project, we're really working towards providing ethical access to highly sensitive archival materials regarding human encounters with the paranormal. So we're kind of trying to help make sense of the impossible as it is represented in these archival collections. And we want to build ethical online access. And people often ask, when are you going to put all of the things that you have online? But the concern is that we need to protect the privacy of the authors of the letters. In particular, we're working with the letters from the Strieber collection, of course, and the John Mack collection. But those both really have sensitive privacy concerns. So, and we'll talk about those more. But in the end, big picture, we're working towards providing online access to people so that you can explore the letters too. You don't have to come into the reading room in our library to do it, but you'd have reasonable and robust tools online to do that. That's where we're trying to head. We're striking that balance between respecting privacy, but also getting this information out there because it's so important to be working in that direction as well. So the baseline for doing any kind of project like that is having organized material. I know I have some fellow librarians in the house, and they will agree with me on that. It's very important. We need to be able to, we have digitized the letters, we're working on transcribing the letters, and then there's a lot more steps that come after that, anonymization included. And all of those things rely on the archives themselves being very organized to begin with. So I wanted you to know that there are a lot of things that you can access already. And so the QR code here is for the page that you're seeing up there. If you're interested in hearing oral histories with some of the donors of the collections, you can do that. You can see library catalog records for books and journals that have been donated as part of the collections. And then the last link over there for physical collections is a link to the guides to the archival collections. Guides to, so it doesn't mean that all the things in the collections have been digitized and made available yet, but the guides to the collections that help you know what are in them are available online. There are about 18 collections that comprise the Archives of the Impossible, and a good number of them are what we call processed and like ready for research and open. Some of them have some restrictions, you know, the John Mack letters and papers are not yet open. I mean, some of them are just restricted because of the privacy, and the others will become open as soon as we are able to organize and describe them. So the collections have individual case, like research records, published articles, journals, books, news clippings, video news footage. All of these are really very valuable. And then there are also experiencer narratives that come from all kinds of people from all over the world. They're international. A lot of them date from the 80s and 90s. And there are photographs, hand-annotated maps of sightings, lots and lots of different kinds of materials. But the Metadata Research Project is really focusing on the over 7,000 individual narratives from experiencers that are in those letters from the Strieber and Mack collections. So here we have some people that you know. Whitley Strieber in the reading room in our library with Jeff Kripal looking at some of the letters from his collection. And this kind of curation of the letters that have drawings and images in them is courtesy of Amanda Nedham, whose work Karin was describing. It's going to be great when she presents her work on that next time we get together. So I look forward to that. But I'm showing this as kind of an image of archival provenance. So archival provenance is really key for rigor in the humanities, and it relates to the source of the materials, the original source of the materials, and the chain of custody or ownership before they came into the archives. So the provenance of the Strieber letters, they came into Ann and Whitley Strieber, and they stayed in their possession until they came to the archives. Same with the John Mack letters. They came into John Mack and his team, and they stayed in the possession of John Mack or the John E. Mack Institute after his death until they came here to the archives. So they weren't scattered around and then recollected and come into the archives. That's the nature of like a very tidy and strong provenance, which adds to the research value of the materials. So, as I mentioned, we did some digitization. Here's an image of some mess happening while that was going on. And then some emerging order on the right. Things looking good over there. And I appreciate, Karin, that you named everyone who participated in that, because it really was quite a Herculean effort. It was all done in-house because they were so sensitive, we didn't want to send them out for digitization. And I just wanted to mention, you know, from there, we do archival description. We usually describe archives at the folder level. So you see folders in a box over there, so the guide is going to have that folder name in it. And we don't go deeper than that because that is just very unreasonable. You can imagine how many pieces of paper are in one box. Or, you know, even just this box of letters has 414 letters in it. And so going through and describing each one, it's just it's too much. And you do that at the cost of other collections not having any description. So we strike a balance. But what we're trying to do in the metadata research project is go down to the item level and not just describe the individual items, which have now been digitized, but going in and developing enough information about each letter that you would be able to start doing some browsing of data, because there have been data points developed by the research team along the way to help you browse and kind of get to know the collection a bit. And from there, in time, in the future, be able to also ask your own kind of natural language questions of that whole corpora of text, so that you're not relying on whatever the description of other people was, but you can ask your own questions of the data. This is just a little collage of what the letters look like. And so this is a little bit of letters. It's some little yellow boxes representing where information needs to be redacted. A little representation of a transcription at the bottom there. I think Elliot's going to talk some more about anonymization and how all that works, but I just want to keep reiterating that that is what's happening before these things go online. And we have been developing policies around access to the collections by conferring with the IRB office on campus here at Rice. We're talking about the anonymization needing to follow the HIPAA safe harbor guidelines for anonymization, which are well beyond just redacting names. It's much more than that. And then also we have been, of course, consulting with members of the experiencer community. This is a little piece that I would like to credit our team member Michael Kelly for. It's kind of a big picture diagram of what are we doing in this project. So it starts with collection acquisition over there. We're currently in the middle phase of collection digitization, which is done, transcription in progress, human review of the transcriptions in progress, building methods and protocols, and then we'll be going on to the research pieces and data mining. Okay, so this is just a reminder that you are welcome in the reading room. We are very findable online and happy to talk with you about what we have and how you can access it. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand it off to Kim Engels from Malloy University. Okay.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Engels. I'm an associate professor of philosophy at Malloy University in Long Island. Before I was a member of the metadata research team, I have always been a philosopher of lived experience. And how do I change this? Oh, okay, thank you. Aha. A philosopher of lived experience, I work in a tradition that's known as phenomenology. And this is a philosophical tradition that was founded by the philosopher Edmund Husserl in the 20th century. And essentially, phenomenology takes the lived experience of the first person, all right, the conscious experience, the world as we live it, as our only starting point, first of all, our only access point to reality, and thus as the starting point of all knowledge, okay? And so a fundamental premise of phenomenology is that it rejects the idea that the world as it is known through the mathematical sciences is more real or more true than the world as we experience it. Now, we certainly can make aspects of our lived experience more knowable or knowable in a more precise way when we know them through instrumentation or through sensors or in methods that are observable in the third person. But it's a way of making our knowing of one aspect of reality more precise. It doesn't replace our first-person experience of the world. Okay. So I put this method to work when I came here to Rice in the summer of 2023 to look through the archives. And I received a small grant from my university. It was an internal research grant to study at the archives, something that, otherwise, if these materials weren't here, and Amanda Foki and her team wasn't doing the work that they were doing to make this possible, a researcher like me would never have gotten funding to be able to look at data like this. So I just want to put that out there. It's very important that this exists. I spent that summer 18 days in the archives working through the Ann and Whitley Strieber collection. The results of that research are now published in the Journal of Philosophy and Theology. I just have the citation there if you'd like to see a more detailed analysis of my findings. So applying phenomenology and why apply phenomenology. I have a quote here from Jeffrey Kripal in a book he wrote called The Supernatural, that he co-wrote it with Whitley, actually, where he says, it's very easy to construct a theory of everything when you get to decide what everything is. And it's very easy to explain everything on the table when you've just taken off of the table everything that you cannot explain. Yes. Applause for Jeff. It's very important, right? But, he's using this metaphor of the table to really expose biases within the human knowledge process, right? That we too often will look at any given data set and conveniently remove that which does not fit in with the model of reality that we are bringing to the situation, right? With our own conception of what can and cannot happen. And so we'll conveniently remove from the table those things which do not fit with our chosen hypothesis. Now, this happens, and from all kind of angles in the UFO conversation, right? Because maybe somebody takes a null hypothesis, right? They say, they're a UFO anti-realist. They say UFOs are reducible to our known agreed upon categories of reality. Okay, then they're going to conveniently remove from the table those experiences which do not fit in with the null hypothesis. The idea that it's just hallucination or mistakes or things like that. Similarly, somebody could really be convinced of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, okay? So they're going to come to the table, look at the data, and they're going to want to keep the experience on the table, but the experiences that affirm the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So that there's things in the data that actually don't fit well with the ETH, they're going to conveniently remove those types of experiences from consideration. And both of those processes, or both of those approaches are problematic, right? And science, or the sciences, plural, makes use sometimes of, some fields of science will make use of limited amount of experience, but they really privilege experience under controlled conditions, right? Observation from experts in controlled settings. So there's still, a privileging of certain types of experience while others gets, put to the side. So the goal of phenomenology is that you're going to look at all of it. You're not going to conveniently remove that which does not fit in with the perspective that you are bringing to the table. I'm going to figure it out at some point. So keeping everything on the table can be weird. These are just a few excerpts from the Ann and Whitley Strieber collection. I won't read through all of them, but phenomenology, we keep things on the table like the physical and sensory data that people report. One person says a strange sour smell accompanied the presence of the beings. Another person says, I saw colors that I'd never seen before in our world, right? Talking about a sensory experience that was completely different than anything that they had previously experienced. Additionally, there's things that I label it just a felt sense or perception. It's not necessarily coming in as physical sensory data. I felt like there was someone else in my mind with me, like I was a book being read, like everything I'd ever done or known was being sped read. Or I really like this one. My only recollection is of what I perceived to be bird people taking me to a silver ambulance. These all come from the Strieber letters. But what do we do with that? That's so weird, right? And also, there's a lot of, throughout the letters a lot of the individual's process of sense-making, right? One person says, after that day, I was only 9 years old, but I felt very different. The whole course of my life had just changed. So all of these are part of the experience, and phenomenology leaves all of that on the table for consideration. Now, how does phenomenology do that? We use a process called bracketing, okay? So bracketing means we're going to consider what appears in experience precisely as it appears and as the individual experienced it, but we're going to suspend judgment on the source or origin of the appearance. Okay, we're going to note what their interpretation is. We're not necessarily going to accept their interpretation, but we're going to note what it is, right? And the best way to actually illustrate bracketing is through example. So I'm just going to bring a small excerpt of a passage here and show you how we would bracket it. So this is an excerpt from a letter. The individual says, "What I remember next is waking up and feeling pressure around my nose. When I opened my eyes, I saw this huge white bug with enormous eyes, and all I could think of was a praying mantis." So there's questions that a phenomenologist is going to set aside for the time being, okay? They're going to bracket the question of what actually happened. We're going to bracket the question of exactly how we should interpret it, and we're going to bracket the question of whether or not this was actually a praying mantis, right? Because if you start with that question of, was this a praying mantis? Well, somebody could instantly say, well, there are no giant praying mantises in our world, so clearly this individual was mistaken or confused or hallucinating or whatever, and then it just gets removed from the table. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to start there. We want to ask phenomenological questions, okay? What did this individual experience? Through what intentionalities or mental acts or modalities of consciousness, okay? How did they experience it? And how did they make sense of it? How was the experience interpreted by them? Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to, in the ultimate analysis, agree with their interpretation, but that's our starting point. So here's just bracketing in action, okay? So she said, or the individual says, what I remember next is waking up. So we have there an indicated modality of consciousness. Because sometimes in these letters, they say, that night I had a very intense dream, or, my eyes were closed when this happened. But this individual, at least in her experience, she is saying, or they are saying, I remembered waking up. Okay, so at least in her lived experience, it felt like it was happening in waking consciousness. So I remembered waking up. We have a modality of consciousness indicated. They say, I remember feeling pressure. So that's a bodily sensation that we bracket out. Okay, we don't jump to a conclusion, oh, obviously she was having her nose operated on. That's too much. We're just bracketing out, there was a bodily sensation, she was feeling pressure on her nose. A visual perception, saw what they described as a white bug. And then there was a mental association or a comparison. It didn't quite rise to being a judgment. They say, all I could think of was a praying mantis. So my mind associated this with a praying mantis. That's how it appeared to me. That's the mental association that I made with it. Now that's a lot that goes into just, bracketing. That's just like a couple of sentences there. So this takes time, right, to actually apply the phenomenological method or the bracketing very carefully. The goal with bracketing is once you do this with enough artifacts, you can start pulling out patterns of things that people see and experience and how they interpret them. And eventually you do want to move to an interpretive analysis, but then whatever explanatory hypothesis you introduce or whatever model you introduce, it's going to be much stronger if it can explain more of what's on the table, more of what appears, right? So these are just some examples of findings. This is by no means exhaustive. When I looked through the Strieber letters, I was only, in 18 days, I was able to get through about 250 letters. One thing was in the intentionalities. Okay, there was a very distinct pattern that many individuals were uncertain about the modality of consciousness in which this took place, because they would use words like dream, But they would put dream in quotation marks because they were indicating that this didn't feel like an ordinary dream. Or sometimes they would say dream-like, okay? Another pattern in the intentionality, there was a lot of confusion. Many people writing are not certain about what happened to them. It was very perplexing. There's a lot of bewilderment, right? I'm not sure. This is how it appeared to me. This is how I experienced it, but I really don't know what happened. And I really don't know. Parts of it I felt like I was awake. Parts of it I felt like I was dreaming. Parts of it felt somewhere in between. Parts of it felt realer than real, right? Another pattern, obviously, there's a lot of visual perceptions involving entities. Gray beings were the most common, human figures, hooded figures, and also insect-looking beings pop up a lot throughout the collection. Something else that is present in the letters phenomenologically. Sometimes it's not focused on because it doesn't fit in with the ETH. But people report, seeing apparitions of deceased friends or family members, individuals they know who have passed away, as also being present or before, during, or after the experience. There's a lot of bodily disturbances, nosebleeds, marks, scars on the body, puncture marks, displacement in time, okay? Periods of missing time, periods of extended time, where they felt like they were experiencing 3 days and then they really only 45 minutes had passed in objective time. Or the opposite, they felt like only 20 minutes had passed and actually had been several hours. Also, there's patterns in the sense-making, okay? Many individuals have a felt sense that the experiences are very meaningful. Even though they're confused, they simultaneously felt that what had occurred is very meaningful, very important. Sometimes they even use religious language, associating it with the sacred. About 1/5 of the letters that I looked at, of the 250 I was able to get through, talked about profound changes in worldview and core values following their experience. So profound transformations that they went through, really looking at the world and really making changes in their hierarchy of values and how they relate to other people and relate to the earth. Where do we go from here? The strength of phenomenology is that we don't dismiss experiences that don't fit in with our assumptions about the world. We get to leave it all on the table, and that's a really great starting point. But our metadata project, we want to put more experience back on the table faster. And my colleague, Elliot Hauser, is going to talk about using information systems tools to do that. But we also want to move to the interpretive step. Once we've pulled out the phenomenological data, we want to be able to test out explanatory models and see how they hold up and how well they can explain this data set. And so to do that, we really need to partner with the sciences for that portion of the project. And so with that, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Charles Yokoyama.
Okay, thank you, Kim, and also thank you, Corinne, for the warm introduction. Thanks to the organizers, and thanks to all of you for being here. Together, I believe we can make the impossible possible. So the archives and the metadata study represent an effort by the humanities to bring human encounters with UFOs and the phenomenon into the academic mainstream. However, an open question, one that I will try to address in my comments today, is whether and how the study can have an impact on science in fields such as physics, biology, and neuroscience. The answer is not obvious. This rare collection of historical witness documents, marvelous as they are, represent a different kind of knowledge from that of the empirical natural sciences. So, as the metadata study starts to assemble this new knowledge from experiencer narratives on the and put them on the table, as Kim said, how will we bring the scientific community on board? How do we convince scientists to take our study seriously? So today, I'd like to build a case for at least 4 areas where I believe the project can impact science. One is archive-based science, starting from the left. Second, addressing social stigma. Third, improving our epistemology. And fourth, citizen censor science. So let's first discuss archive-based science. So we believe that the Metadata project has several features that are compatible with scientific investigation. The first feature is the large case sample size. Thousands, maybe over 5,000 cases, just to begin with. Human encounters with UFOs and entities and the phenomena more broadly, as we all know, are typically rare, sporadic, and unexpected, making quantitative analysis effectively impossible. However, if one compiles thousands of these detailed case studies and letters, as we have done in the archive, our team and others will be able to conduct statistical analyses across this big data set. A second feature is the richness of detail in these cases. This richness will allow an analysis with quantitative tools and AI of both the common and the unique features of experiences. So, for example, let's take common features. We should be able to analyze the prevalence and diversity quantitatively of defined crafts and defined entities. And then turning conversely for unique features, we can analyze entity subtypes and body morphologies. So we have this sort of rich analysis that will give us a lot of diverse information. So the large sample size and richness together will allow us to use the logic and tools of science, I would assert. But how are we going to do this? So first, these statistical analyses that we will build will allow us to build predictive and probabilistic models of experience. So what we'll aim to do is compute the probabilities linking different statistical features within the experience and across experiences. For example, what is the probability distribution for types of entities versus the types of UAP craft morphologies? You can do that analysis if you have the statistical linkage and the probabilistic model. Second, this mathematical modeling should in turn enable hypothesis building and therefore the application of the scientific method to the data set. Third, some of these quantitative models and hypotheses may be experimentally testable. Likewise, scientists might be able to correlate new case study data that will continue to input into the archive with computed statistical features in the text. However, we believe that so I think this is all going to be good, and this is going to be the main thrust of our work in the coming years. But we also believe that data quantitation by itself will likely not convince the scientific community. The social stigma surrounding UFOs and the phenomenon remains very strong in science, and this is how we think we can address it. So I think many here know that the name for acceptable discourse in the social ontology is called the Overton window. In science, historically and currently, UFOs and the phenomenon are outside of this window, and it's policed by the scientific establishment, journals, peer reviewers, editors, and so on. Any progress on the science of UFOs and the phenomenon just can't happen without opening this window. So we think the Metadata project will pose a major problem for the current Overton window, and we expect to engage scientific gatekeepers on several levels. And one of them we term closed-mindedness or closedness. So closed-mindedness is the opposition to scientific frontier topics and the belief that only inside the Overton window is ground truth reality. Thomas Kuhn noted this regarding paradigm shifts in science. In the Metadata project, we intend to distinguish methodological rigor from ontological closedness. Methodological rigor is required for good science. However, too many scientists make the mistake of thinking ontological closedness to new ideas is what it means to be rigorous. In fact, it's the opposite. Methodological rigor demands ontological openness. So rigorous scientists will make ontological accommodations in the form of new ideas. In other words, they follow the data, even if it means crossing an Overton window. So by putting all the data on the table, as we intend to do, we believe we are promoting rigorous science. Another major barrier to scientific acceptance of UFOs that we'll need to address as we get deeper into the academic sort of ecosystem with this data set is that the scientific acceptance of UFOs and the phenomenon are the tactics of skeptics. So one of the common rhetorical tricks of skeptics and debunkers is to undermine an experiencer's credibility. The most common criticisms in this word cloud shown here are like psychosis, mental illness, fabrication, hoaxing, false memory, hallucinations, misinterpreting natural phenomena, dreams, brain damage, dissociation, attention seeking, and so on. And that's not to say that these are not fair criticisms, but in questioning the credibility of experiencers, the skeptics can take this too far. So it's easy to dismiss, or it's easy for them to weaponize and invalidate all cases and categorically shut down discussion based on arguments such as these. Also, in questioning the credibility of experiencers, it's easy to dismiss single cases. But here, of course, we have a huge data set and believe that the mental gymnastics needed to dismiss thousands of cases with similar findings are going to be increasingly implausible. Moreover, the large data set with our quantitative analysis may allow us to directly address the skeptics' criticisms. For example, we can statistically model skeptic claims. Let's take mental illness, for example, in a control cohort, and then compare that to the statistical prevalence of reported mental illness of experiencers in the archive, which we have that data. We think this and similar analyses will improve experiencer credibility and help to break down another barrier to working within and in the scientific community. A third plank of this area's successful peer review and publication is ultimately the arbiter of success in science. And sadly, research on the phenomenon has not, to my knowledge, been published in these very top scientific journals, because it was first ignored by the scientific establishment due to stigma. And second, unfortunately, most of this research has simply not been rigorous enough to meet elite standards for publication. So, Karin mentioned I'm a former journal editor and gatekeeper. I know the standards for publication in these high-profile journals. I know the specific tactics that editors and peer reviewers use to shut down publications and peer review of inconvenient papers. I'd like to flip that narrative and reverse engineer the process so that in the thank you. So in the archive metadata project, we intend to publish manuscripts in excellent peer-reviewed journals and support its citability by leading scientific journals. And we will do that by actively engaging with editors and reviewers in journals. Okay, let's talk about epistemology, which, like solving the stigma issue, is also key for UFOs and the phenomenon to gain scientific acceptance. And I'm very grateful to many of the speakers who've come before me who have addressed this issue in pieces and parts. And I think it really tees up the comments that I'd like to add to theirs. So in our current research ecosystem, many scientists assume that the scientific method is ground truth. As we cycle through in the smaller circle here from scientific hypothesis to data to evidence and then back around again, this is the scientific method as we understand it. What we don't understand, what many scientists overlook, is that the scientific method and the research ecosystem that runs it is embedded in a philosophy of knowledge or epistemology. So this epistemology, in turn, is linked to a methodology to build knowledge and ultimately creating an ontology or model of reality. And so this framing of the scientific ecosystem is really important to understand if we're going to crack this problem. Most scientists don't realize that their ontology is only as good as the assumptions underlying their epistemology and methodology. And we have to make these arguments further to change that. In our current scientific ecosystem, our epistemology is called material reductionism, which advocates that natural systems are explainable by the interactions of their smaller components, like a clock. Reductionism has been a very effective and successful way to study nature scientifically because it makes accurate predictions, which can be used to build technologies based on prediction and the material properties thereof. However, reductionism also has notable failures, among which is explaining the hard problem of consciousness. According to reductionism, consciousness is solely a property of the physical brain. However, if experiencers' observations are true, then this view of consciousness cannot also be true. There is a growing consensus that material reductionism, by its own self-limiting logic, only describes a small fraction of nature, and thus reductionism can't platform a ground truth ontology of reality. So in sum, reductionism is really the classic problem of the elephant and the three blindfolded wise men. What we need to do is take off our blindfolds and look at the whole system in all its glorious complexity and keep everything on the table. So reductionism contrasts with holism, a philosophy arguing that complex systems like the human brain can't be understood only by reconstructing its isolated constituent components. Holistic epistemologies are human consciousness-centered. They're not sensory input-centered like reductionism. Holism puts everything on the table, including experiences in the wild. It's the phenomenological approach. Importantly, a small but growing number of scientists do support holistic epistemologies. Moreover, starting from observed or lived experience is the norm in some fields outside of science. Thus, when we have noetic sources of knowledge, like the archives of the impossible, scientists must go beyond reductionism to employ or deploy more holistic models of reality, like phenomenology that Kim introduced. Also, reductionism and holism are assumed to be mutually exclusive philosophies of science. However, we believe that they could complement and extend each other's ontological capacity. And that's a project that we'll be working on as the archive develops. So in the metadata project, we will first promote the adoption and use of holistic epistemologies like phenomenology to scientists. And second, we plan to explore the use of holistic approaches to mathematics like complexity science or quantum physics to model reality. So we need to transition to models of non-local consciousness or a consciousness-centered reality. Then a practical ontology might involve both holistic and reductive methodologies. Okay, the final point I'd like to raise with you today is whether witness testimony, like those in the archives, can still contribute to the scientific method. Many scientists would just flat out say no, that they are only they are qualified observers. So the fundamental problem is that non-scientist human observation is often ignored since it is unqualified or uncalibrated. As noted, encounters with the phenomenon are typically rare and unexpected. Likewise, because some human witness testimony is unreliable, and there's no question about that, due to factors like mental illness and any of the other on the list that I mentioned before, scientists just tend to assume that all witness testimony is unreliable, which is a kind of a bias or fallacy of logic. These points are valid in theory, but their implementation in the real-world science is too severe. So in most experiments, the observations are not completely controlled, but as long as these uncontrolled elements are identified and well documented by scientists, the data can remain valid. And that's our stance on the validity of witness testimony. Science does involve rigorous, well-prepared, and repeated observations. So with the metadata project as a starting point, we will explore the idea of humans as sensors, specifically calibrated sensors, in designing new scientific experiments for the further documentation of UFOs and the phenomenon. We hope to develop a citizen science of the phenomenon, because while we might replicate some elements of the phenomenon in a lab, the vast majority of observations will continue to be in the field, obviously. Citizen sensor science will require initiatives to study and calibrate humans as scientific observers, like pilots or like other types of expert witnesses. Then, in the field, they will be prepared to record sightings. For example, we can promote the training and certification of people for scientific observation of the phenomenon, similar to what is done in other fields like aviation, fire spotting, and ornithology or bird watching. So in closing, the Archive Metadata Project will center the experience of UFO abductees for scientific and academic research, picking up the thread from John Mack a quarter century ago. I use here in this picture the metaphor of the ivory-billed woodpecker, a near-extinct species of bird in this part of the country, to illustrate the scope of the type of scientific challenge to search for the impossible in nature. This is a work in progress, but I hope I've started to answer the question of how the Metadata Project might serve as a platform for scientific investigation, but also to build a new framework for science. Thank you.
All right, hello. My name is Elliot Hauser. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin School of Information. Apparently, I'm also a V12 engine. Thank you, Karin. I didn't write this down, but I do want to kind of mention what kind of research that I've done to date. If you look at my Google Scholar or whatever, you won't see experiencers on there. I was brought here because of the people. And so I don't want to out you because no one wants to be outed about, with their Reddit name or things, right? But some online communities, I just observed from a distance, experiencers talking to each other in a specific place that was moderated such that they could share their stories. And I stumbled onto it and I saw people. And that's one of the things that I study, right? And I found myself spending a lot of time thinking, wait a second, this is worth investigation, right? There are people. And so I have talked my way onto this project. I feel so grateful to be doing this because it is less likely that I will get denied tenure now that I have a research program in this. So, well, publications, we'll see. So some prior work that I've done, I want to mention, so Gary and actually Carl mentioned that, something I agree with, right, is that all of our claims, and not just in science, but in academia, are contingent. And I would use a fancy jargon thing, defeasible logic, right? That's something that can be defeated by a better argument, by more evidence. And Gary had a much catchier thing. He said, I'm wrong today, but I'm going to be righter tomorrow, right? Great, yeah. They both said that mathematical truth, right? That's the only place that you can get it. I want to add a thing. So some of the research that I've done is, how does information make things true? And here's my counterexample. What's my social security number? That's a fact. That's true. As long as there are people that enforce that consensus, that's as true as mathematics. That's not science, right? That's some of the research that I've done. I'm interested in how information shapes what is true. It serves as a medium for making things true, right? Not necessarily in a perfidious way, a lying way, a deceptive way. That's one of the things that we're doing. When we give each letter a unique identifier, we made something true. We made something citable. We made something evidenceable, right? No interpretation yet. Another thing that I've studied is incidental encounters with autonomous robots. If you see an autonomous robot rolling past you on the sidewalk, what is that like? What do you think? And so in these kind of socio-technical collaborations, I come in and I help my colleagues ask questions they might not feel equipped to ask, but that are important to the broader context of what they're doing. Texas Robotics is an amazing place. We do really, really cool stuff. And we've become one of the leaders in studying incidental encounters with autonomous robots. So there's some other encounters here that I'm very, very, very interested in. One of the things that I do in my teams is research informatics, and that's what I'm doing on this project. So why is this project happening in the archives? I advanced this concept. There are different societies of proof, right? Different individuals and different groups that ask questions, believe, don't believe, move on, accept, don't accept, right? Those lines are drawn differently. And in a lot of our scholarly communities, we need an archival basis for the kinds of investigations that we do. This is providing that. So some are calling this field that we want to provide the archival basis for UAP studies. I give that a thumbs up. I also like us to encourage us to think of it as experiencer studies too. So here's a big scary mission. This exceeds just us, right? I think this could be maybe our mission in this room if you think it's something that kind of resonates. We're going to build the most comprehensive collection of first-person accounts, interviews, and other records of anomalous experiences across all historical periods, media types, and modalities. That's scary. That's scary. Now, that's not what we're showing you today, but missions are bigger, right? These are some, you've heard aspects of these 4 goals here, right? We want experiencers to be seen and heard in public discourse. That's what got me here, right? I saw people. I know people, and I'm here. That's a society of proof that I'm in, right? Be seen and heard in public discourse and academic research, especially about topics related to their experiences, but not limited to that. To help achieve this, the Archives of the Impossible is stewarding experiencers' testimony, making it available for research, that archival basis. We want to study and better understand the experiences of others, regardless of whether those experiences resemble our own or seem possible. And I've been learning a lot. I was familiar with phenomenology, but when a phenomenologist comes in the room, I've been learning a lot from Kim Ingalls. We're really, she's a great colleague. And we are aiming to provide you, those who are a part of the new phase of scholarship, the scholarship on experiencers, and experiencers themselves. Many of you are experiencers. The archival basis needed to come to know the impossible. That's what our project is designed to achieve. So I'm going to return to this diagram later. You'll recognize some of the photos, if you look closely, from Amanda Foke's talk. When the materials come in, there's physical assets. We make digital assets of those. Those assets get enriched, right? If I give you some PDFs, there's maybe some value, but really you want to know what's in them before you take the time to do what Kim did or do whatever you as a researcher are going to do with these materials. That requires some processing, some descriptive metadata, what's in there, some enrichment metadata. Can we start connecting named entities that the letters mention, anything that is a facet of relevance. And we need an internal workspace to be able to produce the interpretive metadata that can be both a research product and a finding aid, and the open data sets that is the kind of ultimate place that we're going to get. But we've got some challenges. Project is directly aimed at addressing them on the way. Each of my collaborators mentioned at least one of these challenges. Karin spoke about some of the harms that experiencers have faced as they sought to share and make sense of their experiences. I'm going to talk about how we're addressing what Miranda Fricker has called epistemic injustice. Amanda told you how Archives of the Impossible has begun to address this injustice by stewarding experiencer testimony. But visibility in the archives is complex. Experiencers want visibility for their experiences when they choose it. But there are potential risks to experiencers themselves becoming visible, especially when they don't have control over it. That's what Amanda kind of told you about in terms of the privacy, right? The real sensitivity and complexity of this. We want experiencers to be seen and heard in our research. So I'm going to talk about our community-engaged approach. That is an open door, an invitation to be involved. Those are practices that have been developed in other fields and we can use. In the hands of an expert researcher like Kim, archival experiencer narratives can provide us with a deeper understanding of others' experiences that we haven't had and that we don't understand. We can't imagine sometimes. But enrich our understandings of our own, whatever they may be. Kim's research built upon her painstaking analysis of 250 letters from the Strieber collection, right? Her findings were rich. I encourage you to read her paper, it's really great. She and we know that there's that much more richness in the rest of the collection. So I'm going to tell you how we're planning to make it easier for researchers to use their existing research methods. That was key, right? When Charles told you that we want to have enable more sophisticated epistemologies, that means you need to let researchers bring their theoretical tools to the table as opposed to saying, hey, we built a tool that does this. Can you use it? No, we want to start with what scholars like Kim, but far beyond, right? Different kinds of research methods being applied. There are some excellent collections out there. I can tell you there's no better set of collections in the world right now to help the impossible become known. But as you heard Charles and others at this conference talk about, academia more broadly will have to make room for knowledge of the impossible. The humanities and interpretive social sciences have a major role to play in this, but they can't do it alone. I'll tell you our plans for helping researchers of diverse epistemologies and methods make space for and work with experiencer narratives. So there's some challenges. I've got my work cut out for me to convince you that we have a plan and some initial results, all right? So let's start with the hardest one, coming to know the impossible. How does one do this? So my kind of addition to the discourse on this, which has been so rich in this whole conference, the category of the impossible is, I submit, the feeling of ontological closure. When you can't think about how it could be possible. You've run into an ontological wall, a rigidity about what things can exist, what the world is like, what we, the conscious subjects observing all of this, are and can be. What gets shocked when an experiencer or anyone experiences ontological shock? I think it's the unchallenged assumptions, the closed ontologies that these assumptions imply. What gets shocked is the boundary, such as we've constructed it. That's what gets shocked. So, as Charles told you, epistemological rigor doesn't require ontological closure. It's not a requirement, right? If your methodological rigor requires rigidity, thumbs up, but the ontological rigidity is optional. In fact, I agree with philosopher of science Nancy Cartwright that ontological rigidity can contribute to scientific rigor, but it's nowhere near sufficient to it. Evidential diversity is what Cartwright argues is necessary and sufficient for the ascription of rigor to, or validity, right, to a whole scientific enterprise. Rigorous science should show us a great and overwhelming diversity of its expected evidence. It should actively look for and not find disconfirmatory evidence. Cartwright thus joins us in examining what's left on the table for explanation. Her conception of validity, scientific validity, celebrates the tables that are full of diverse data, diverse sets of evidence, and still accomplish the parsimonious explanation that is the prize of academic inquiry. And we've seen some very full tables at this conference. Let's put them all together. Let's get all that stuff on the same table. All right. The impossible is just impossible, right? How can we possibly come to know it? The approach we're taking is to keep as much on table for explanation as we can. This is a broader service to our academic colleagues. So much of the understanding we have is from the diverse evidence that our forebears, contemporaries, metaphorically bring to the table. Yet, as it's well known, it can be difficult to bring something new to the academic table. Or, as Wes detailed, sometimes it can be difficult to bring something old to the academic table if it hasn't been there for a while. The archives are a critical resource for those of us doing this work, researchers and experiencers, to bring what we have to the table when it's time. Archival research, like what Kim does, it's hard. It's great. You should read the paper, right? But, man, why is it so hard? Well, remember these pictures? Was it, how many banker's boxes?
350.
350 banker's boxes, good Lord.
Chock-a-block full.
Some of the difficulty comes from the physicality of the materials. Maybe that's an entry into the material reductionism, I don't know. Maybe we reduce those banker's boxes. So Karen is detailed elsewhere. She drove a U-Haul full of banker's boxes from Boston to Houston, right? Archives have to access those materials, thanks to Karen, they got it here. They have to accession them and catalog the materials that they agree to custody. That's a commitment that Amanda and Jeff and Rice's Fondren Library make to the donors, right? To custody these materials, keep them safe. Due to climate change, Houston gets flooded every now and then. It's kind of, you picked the storage, the storage service on the hill, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good? Okay, great. The materials are very safe. Amanda Foki is on it. Mm-hmm. The materials come in various states of organization, but those must be standardized. And that produces a catalog. But as Amanda indicated, the catalog tells you what the physical materials are, how you might come in to get them. I'm going to give you a sense of the scale of the collection, right? So this is Kim's paper. I had 240. I'm sorry, I keep underestimating.
I think it is about 240.
240? Okay, 240. All right, good. 240 letters. That's what 240 letters looks like if you make them that big, right? That was in Streber Box 7. Here are the rest of the Streber boxes. Let's put Kim's letters right where they go. Okay, cool. Here's the Mac letters. Yeah. And here are the Mac interview transcripts. Now, what you were visualizing here is the number of folders per box. And I can tell you that the interview transcripts are folders like this, right? So we're not yet to the point where I have the data where I can tell you how many pages we're going to have. We're tracking it as we go through it. And the numbers keep getting updated because right now, as we go through, sometimes there are multiple letters per folder. So we're over 8,000 right now, letters. And there's a lot of data, right? And by the way, the Ann and Whitley Streber collection, the John E. Mack collection, they have a lot of other boxes. These are the letters in the transcripts, right? The interview transcripts. There's a lot of rich data here. So this is the kind of overview, right? The current standard of practice, take some physical assets, if you have the labor, and we do here, digitize them, put those in an asset management system, right? The asset management system is kind of your inventory. You get your online catalog. People can come, like Kim did, and access the physical materials. If you have an archival content management system, as this archive does, all this boxes and arrows, this is some of the stuff that I do. So if you don't like boxes and arrows, you might want to, I don't know, look away. Right? The archival CMS is how the websites that you see when you go to impossiblearchives.rice.edu are made. So you can put some websites up and showcase your collection. If you want to, if you manually make one, you can make a digital collection of anything that's been digitized, right? This is the state of the art. This is how research archives work. And it's good, but it's not good enough for us. We want to advance the state of the art. So archival research is hard. How can we better study these narratives? Well, let's make this picture simpler. Not because it's going away, don't worry. I took some boxes off. But because we need some other tools that feed back in, right? The descriptive and enrichment metadata, what's in there? I know you want to know that. That's also what Kim wanted to know. And she got her 240 letters and she read them in a row. We want to help researchers like Kim better know where the materials in the collection that are responsive to their research interests are to better pick the ones that their attention gets put to. And we want open data. We want open data to be able to share with researchers in the community. How do we get there? We need, this is not going to be a user interface, this is a team interface, right? Our collaborative metadata workspace where we can work with data that hasn't yet been de-identified or anonymized. How does it get in there? Well, data modeling. That's one of the things that I do too. You need to model, literally, boxes and folders, physical things. The letters, that's a corpus. That's a logical subset of that. The digital assets all have a relationship to a specific physical asset, and some of the digital assets have relationships to other digital assets, like text extracted from a PDF, right? That data model lets us link everything back into the existing cataloging system. This is the boring stuff, the science of the boring. Amanda Foki and I connected on this. That's what we do in the memory institutions around here, right? And actually, I think Jeff said it great, right? The invisible college, that's great, but the visible college is gonna be really boring because this is what we do. Right? You don't want to know, like, I don't know, the letter, about a third in the back and the crumpled one. The one I dog-eared that letter. No, you want a unique identifier, right? These are the kinds of things that we have to do to make that happen. And then a bunch of computational enrichment. And of course, research papers. So hopefully I can have a new research arc right after the ones that I told you about. And hopefully those people writing the letters in my tenure dossier think it's a really good story. We'll see. All right, so these are just scans, right? The scans are, remember, a digital asset about a physical asset. We need another digital asset. That's the extracted text data. Maybe AI could help. I know you've been thinking it. Everybody's thinking it. We're going to use AI in the modern parlance to mean anything that's computerized. And, machine learning models are great. Natural language processing models, all this, sometimes regular expressions, all that's AI, right? Best tool for the job. Sometimes it's generative models, but not always. But we'll call it AI because we are applying for some big grants, and that's what they're funding. All right, so this is what it looks like. We have a PDF, right? It's a digital asset, about a physical asset. We want some text data out of it. Well, here we go. There was the first tool that we used, open source tool, Transcribus. It's really great. It's flexible. And there we go. Are we done? No, we're not done. We're not. It's very kind of hard to see, but there's a bunch of little red boxes that showed up, right? Those are things that it got wrong. I found another tool. It's a commercial tool in this case. So we're paying. I bet you if we started to optimize this open source tool and train it on this data that we could get some better performance out of it. But we have the resources and we paid, right? Sometimes we can turn money into progress. When we can, we have the money, we figured out how to do it, we do that. And guess what? The CER, that stands for character error rate. That's how you would evaluate the effectiveness of an OCR tool. And that is a 95% or 96% reduction in character error rate and a 96% reduction in the manual correction that has to happen afterwards. So evaluation of these tools' performances is critical. It's really critical to know where we can put our effort, where it might be worth trying to improve stuff, where, if we have it, we can deploy our resources to turn money into progress. But AI makes mistakes. I'm not here to sell you, everything's great, don't worry. Please still support us, collaborate with us. If you are a funder of research, fund our grants, right? But AI makes mistakes, and some of them are really hard to check. This is the kind of mistake a human would make. There's a generational thing about whether you can read cursive, and also I know it's up here, right? But a circle, kind of boxed over there, that is animal in cursive. And this tool said creature. Now remember, I told you, machine learning models, right? That was the old way of doing OCR. Now they're using generative AI, and the error rates are way lower. But when they make mistakes, they're difficult to detect mistakes. Difficult to detect mistakes. We have to figure out, we have to make trade-offs, right? I don't want any of this going into the data sets that we release, but we have finite resources. We're going to correct, we did. And by the way, Karen Young, yes, these images are credit to Karen. Our volunteers and our collaborators on this are doing amazing work. This one is even worse. And, okay, I'm going to see if I can read the full sentence, right? I'm aware that I'm in an altered state. I tell myself during the experience, and I attempt to test myself. I ask myself, am I dreaming? ? Okay? Aware that I'm in an altered state, I tell myself during the experience, I prod myself, quote, I'm dreaming, end quote, and then I ask myself, they got the whole line wrong. They added punctuation. What is going on here, right? This is a hard thing. I would trade this kind of error for the randomly distributed errors that you saw, right? But we need to make sure that we can catch this. Here we go. Slowly, this would fall. That's what's written in cursive. Slowly, this moved table. How can we catch these without checking? So reliable evaluation of AI tool performance is critical. We, in the humanities and social sciences, we benefit. We get a windfall of progress from commercial AI. When the tools are being tuned for tasks that we need done, we benefit. Sometimes they're not quite tuned for what we do, right? So the reliable evaluation means to make sure that our evaluation methods are representing what we need things to do. So this is our question we're going to have to ask over and over again on this project. Is AI good enough to help us do, in this case, optical character recognition of handwritten text? There's some typed text too, but handwriting is the hard one. What about that transcript correction? More AI. The first one didn't get it right. Maybe. I want to test that. if I have the time and resources, here are many more things that we do. Named entity recognition, semantic search, anonymization, quantitative analysis, word sense disambiguation, qualitative coding, quote extraction, lots of things. We need a flexible and repeatable process so the decision gets easier. Can we evaluate this? I want that answer to be, yeah, sure, and want to make it as easy as possible so that we can assess not just whether AI in that amorphous sense that you put into a grant proposal could do it, but which specific tool, which specific parameters, what specific configuration. There we have a bunch of open research questions. Is AI good enough to help us answer research questions like these, research questions like chems? Archival experience or research is especially hard. So how do we better evaluate and apply AI to archival experience or research? This is a diagram of what this process looks like. This is working with researchers, also people on our archives team, to understand at a very modular level, granular level, what are the tasks that you do? That requires an interview and someone with enough experience in doing modeling to do it. You probably can't tell me how you drive your car in a boxes and arrows diagram, but I can, and I can train researchers to extract that from an interview with you. Once we know what tasks constitute your work, there's a finite number of them. Once we get good at evaluating tools on those tasks with real data from our collection, then we're able to make better decisions. So here's an example of what a boxes and arrows diagram would look like of a qualitative research method called grounded theory. Right? There's some tasks. There's some artifacts that come out of it. The artifacts are important because you saw anonymization up on there. Do you want ChatGPT deciding that very complex ethical question? No? Do you want ChatGPT deciding that really complex ethical question? No. Thank you. All right, good. So if we know what we mean, first of all, we have to figure out what we mean. What is good anonymization? That's going to be hard. That's why we have smart people. That's why we want to engage with the community to answer that hard question. Then we can get some examples, and then we can figure out how we can automatically evaluate whether and how good these tools are at what we want to do. So this is just some, Kim's research is an example, and Kim, the text is really small, no one can see, but researchers have intermediate research artifacts, right, that they don't show anybody. It's an integral part of their research. In Kim's case, it was a Word document with all of the letters that she went through, her notes, some tags and things like that. That was not meant to be shared. That was a tool for her to think through her problems. Right? That's going to be different for different researchers, different for different people doing different kinds of work. And that's what it looks like when it's put into a database. Not that that is what we will produce, but these intermediate research artifacts are things that we need if Kim is coming into the archive to use this tool. Kim needs to know whether AI is any good at doing what she did in this intermediate step. All right. So, which of these letters concern epistemic injustice? Not being believed, losing a job, losing custody of a child. Those are all real examples that we've seen in these letters and unfortunately in contemporary experiencer communities, right? Being over-medicated, hospitalized. These are consequences. Which of these letters contain that? That's a great example of an intermediate research question, right? I'm not asking AI to do my research for me. I'm asking AI to help me find which of these 8,000 letters can let me do my work on that. So, is AI good enough to help us answer research questions like these? AI and humans, the researchers, can work together as long as we know whether and when AI is any good at the things that we want it to do. So how do we get bigger? We want to be the best. We want to be the biggest. We want lots of archives of the impossible around the world, right? We can't be the only one in the world. That's fine. But we want to be the biggest and best that we can. So how do we make it bigger? If we say first-person accounts of anomalous experiences, there's a lot of data in the world that's responsive to that, right? So if we have this mission, we need a plan. So here's the plan. Increase the breadth of the collections and the depth of the analysis over time. The reason I mentioned I do research infrastructure, it's a if you build it, they will come kind of moment, right? Like, I'm not building a research infrastructure for one person. Research infrastructure is for a research community to do work very efficiently on ever expanding data of a similar kind. So when we do this with this text data, we can apply it again with other data sets. So archival collections, that's column 1. Community archives, there are a variety of groups out there that already digitize and transcribe anomalous experiences, like channeling, or astral projection, or remote viewing, right? These are community resources that are already made open. That doesn't mean we go scrape it. That means we go talk to those people and see if there's a way that we can work together. And contemporary digital communities. This is an active area of research in general, social media research, online communities, and there are online experiencer communities, including the people that brought me here, because I could see that there were people behind these stories. So, there we go. Data segmentation. How many experience reports are in there? Data enrichment. What are the characteristics of the units of analysis that we're interested in? Interpretive metadata, effects on worldview, self-conception, social acceptance or stigma, etc. And this deductive, inductive, abductive analysis that I won't tell you about. Future collections, that's more insights. And more capabilities means more insights from the existing materials. So visibility. Complex. How can we steward the testimony these materials contain? That's community-engaged research ethics. You know, in the field of disability studies, the dictum, nothing about us without us, has come about, right? The unintentionally exploitative relationship with participants in research is a well-known tragedy in academia. And we don't have to start from scratch. Right? Community-engaged research is a community. So what that means is getting some data on the table, bringing some people around the table and talking about what's the research value of this data. Experiencers, members of the community know that. They have a great perspective on that. And what are the potential harms? How do we balance those? How do we remove the aspects of this data that bear the harm? All right, testimonial justice for experiencers. Epistemic harms, that's because you know something, because you saw something, a harm happens to you. Epistemic injustice is when that is not redressed. Over time, that turns into epistemicide, like cultural genocide, right? Where a specific category of knowledge is systematically removed. Unfortunately, that sounds familiar, right? Testimonial injustice for experiencers, not listening to experiencers, is hermeneutic injustice for everyone. It makes it hard to make sense of what's going on when we can't hear everyone's story. So when experiencers can't be seen, heard, and understood, we all lose the ability to make sense of the world that we share, the ability to make sense of the impossible. So how do we help right this wrong? We look and we listen. These are some images, just roughly categorized, of what are in these letters. These will possibly be the first open data set because the anonymization challenges are significantly simpler. And I think there will be a few thousand of these, right? These will each have a unique identifier, right? And so as the text data comes online, you will be able to connect it with the letter that it came to. But I think in the beginning, we'll probably be ready to release the image data set before we have the text data set ready. Diagrams, this is a technological device. Drafted pretty well by that experiencer, knew how to use a ruler and compass there. Also, beings and crafts, there's a lot of triangles in here, randomly. And I think a lot of experiencers notice there's a lot of triangles, like lots of triangles. What's the deal with the triangles? I don't know, but that's a great research question. This is a phenomenological rendering of what might normally be called alien script. No, it's a novel script. We don't know what language that is. Guess what? There's a lot of data sets out there already that have had that. I would love someone who has that expertise to come do a comparative analysis using the materials. So let experiencers be seen and heard. Let's make sense of the impossible together. Thank you.